There you go. Okay, so yes, we're talking about martial law, and the reason for that is in September 21. And I want to make sure that they talk to people of your age of it, because you do see, and I'm sure you see this also on your social media feeds, all these young people who seem to not understand what martial law was, or are falling for these lies that have been propagated. And yeah, looking at your chats, no, rebellion. Martial law is not rebellion. Martial law is actually the response to rebellion by the government, right? If there is a rebellion, then what's one of the reasons why the government could declare martial law? Um, there is atrocities and corruption. Yes, the desaparecidos, which is actually a term used in Latin America, but was also applied here because here the term was salvaging, right? People were salvaged. You've heard that term, I guess? Haven't you ever thought about how strange that is? That we are using a term which means rescue or recovery to mean killing people, right? Um, yeah, as Mary said, no, historical revisionists are making people believe that the Marcos regime was the golden age. Yes, and I kind of feel a little bit of guilt about that, because as one of the people who experienced it, right? I grew up in martial law. Um, we didn't talk about it, right? My generation kind of didn't want to talk about it. We didn't really share. We're only sharing now or more recently, And I think the belief was, "Eh, it's so wrong, it'll never happen again." And the thing was, it's not there. And the thing is, when you have a group of people who can manipulate information very well, it's not hard to make people start to believe something else. Right? Let's see. Uh, Vince is saying martial law was a way to deal with the various terrorist groups that sprung up during its time, but it only did the opposite. Yes, Vince. I think the official press release kasi of Marcos was there was a growing communist threat to the country, right? Which communist threat was this? Can you name the party? NPA, CPP, or Hook? Uh, well, the Hook. Somebody fell out. The Hook threat was actually the Hook turned into the. I'll put it on your chat. There, turned into that, right? Or the PKP, not the CPP, right? The PKP actually worked with Marcos, right? Yeah, the leaders of the PKP were the leaders of the Hawk Rebellion as well, and Marcos have pretty good relationships with them. Some of them worked in government offices actually, right? So that leaves you with the other guys, right? This one, the uh, I just like typing. They're Communist Party of the Philippines. Give a guess as to how many people were officially members of the Communist Party of the Philippines in 1972 when Marcos declared martial law. Give a number. So, one. Less than 20. More naman. 90, lower. 50, higher. About 68, right? So the communist threat that forced Marcos to declare martial law was 68 people, right? So it's but how does that connect to the massive protests that were going on around the country? The first quarter storm, I'm sure you've heard about, right? How does that connect? Well, those 68 people were student leaders, and so they had access to student bodies. But what were the people angry about, pa? What was the first quarter storm about? It was a very violent time. People were throwing bombs, right? There were a lot of clashes, violent clashes with the police. What were they angry about? Naging history lesson, no? Last history question, promise. Nagrally ata sila in front of Malacanang. Yes, they did. That's why during Marcos's time, Malacanang was barricaded. You couldn't get close. Menjola Bridge was closed. You couldn't even go over the bridge. That was how far the barricades were, right? Because they didn't want people storming the palace, right? Inflation of prices, partially, right? Partially. But the big problem there was number one, uh, there were rumors already circulating that Marcos was planning to remain in power beyond his mandated 4 years. He was already on his second 4-year term, so that was the last term, right? And there were already rumors circulating that he was going to stay beyond it. How do we know that there were rumors? One was he fought with his vice president, who was, I think, Ferdinand Lopez, if I remember right, or Lopez, right? Lopez of the Lopez family, if you're wondering, right? So they had a big fight, and apparently it was because Marcos had told him that Marcos was planning to stay on after. And so of course nagalit siya because I'm pretty sure he was planning to become president, right? Marcos justified martial law by saying that Juan Ponce Enrique's car was attacked. Yes, it was later revealed that he was the one or that Enrile orchestrated the attack. Also true. This is true, and this was admitted to by Juan Ponce Enrile himself on the Presidential Gazette. In other words, the official presidential publication of the Philippine government. He admitted that he orchestrated. In other words, he had his own car shot, right, to make it look like he was ambushed. The funny thing here is, decades later, when Enrile publishes his autobiography, he says that the attack was genuine. Again, never mind that he already said in 1987 that it was him. He fabricated the thing. He says, hindi pala. Totoong na-attack ako. And the funny thing is, in the 2016 elections, his son, who was running for congressman, has his car shot uh, in the same way, and then claims that inambush siya and he was trying to generate sympathy for votes. He didn't win. But it's just so silly that your dad did it and you think you do it too, so you might work again. Right? It was a very minor thing. It was a very minor item in the news because I think nobody believed that the guy was actually shot. Because why would you shoot him for whatever? We don't know, right? Anyway, right? Yes, there was also an attempt on Imelda Marcos's life, supposedly, right? We don't know if it's true, but there was supposed to be an attempt on Imelda Marcos's life, and these were justifications that he was using to say that the Philippines was in grave danger, or the state, the nation, the state was in grave danger, and I must declare martial law. Yes. So, what do you think martial law was like? Nung na-declare na, no? And, you know, after an initial kerfuffle, what do you think daily life was like? Anybody want to guess? Based on stories I've heard, okay. Yeah, curfew. There were curfews, yes. Freedom of speech is gone. It was very quiet. People were always scared to go outside. See, that's the thing. When you hear the Marcos loyalists say it was very quiet and it was very peaceful in martial law, it was true. Why? People were terrified. Why? There was the possibility of you getting arrested for no reason. They didn't need a reason to arrest you. That's what the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus is, right? The police do not have to tell you why you were arrested. There were areas put down na pag area nila Marcos, yeah, so it was, yeah, because Syempre, right? They were already loyal to Marcos anyway, so they were happy about it. Plus, usually what the and up to today, that's what politicians do. If they're from a certain province, the money that they have will go to that province so that at least they secure the votes for that province. That's still what they do up to today. Which is why Ilocos remains very much Marcos country because Marcos poured a lot of money into Ilocos. But yeah, so there, no. So just to give you context, it was peaceful. It was orderly. That's true, but it wasn't happy. It wasn't a, it wasn't a safe period. Um, what happened to you if you were caught, outside of curfew, which was midnight? Eventually it would go up to midnight. It's actually later than the curfew we have now for COVID. You'd get questioned. You'd get brought to a police station. You'd get questioned. You'd probably be held overnight. And then if you were one of those people who got caught outside of curfew because you were partying, they would probably make you pick up trash on the street the next morning. That was your punishment. So some people are saying, yeah, sita mo, kaya mayaman ka, kaya mahirap ka, pare-pareho yung treatment ni Marcos sa'yo. Yeah, kinda. Except if you look like an activist. If you look like a college student, right, chances are you will be interrogated, right? And the possibility of you getting some sort of harm from it was quite high, which is why this one I got from my colleagues who were activists during the time. It became standard practice for activists to carry toothbrushes in their back pocket because if you get stuck in curfew, doon ka matutulog, right? Wherever you were, that's where you're going to sleep. And hopefully they have some water, so at least you can brush your teeth in the morning when you leave. That's one. And so sabi nila, that's how you knew if someone was an activist or not. May toothbrush sa pulsa. The other one was the term ingat, right? Which you're familiar with, right? When you're leaving. But ingat, that came from martial law. And it was a much more serious uh, farewell greeting at the time. Mag-ingat ka. Right? Which eventually gets shortened to ingat. But the whole practice of saying be careful as a way of saying goodbye started with martial law. Right? It was something that was said by activists to each other. Ingat ka. Right? And therefore, you can imagine the prevailing attitude at the time that there was this need to be careful and this need to be aware of what was going on all the time. So yes, but it was very quiet. It was very orderly. So that's not true, right? The economy was actually relatively okay for the most part up to about 1980. Why? We were coming from an enormously strong economy in the 1960s. The Philippines was leading the region in economic growth and progress in the 1960s. So yeah, we were doing well. We had billions of dollars in debt to the World Bank. Many of the real people in Marcos' regime did not give any proper advice, but instead solely tried to stay on his good side. Well, okay, let's unpack, no? The debt started, yeah, in the 70s. And what Marcos was doing was he would commission projects, right? Such as the CCP, Heart Center of the Philippines, these big infrastructure projects, the San Juanico Bridge, and he'd borrow money for them. And most of the money didn't go to the project, right? Instead, it went to him. So a lot of times the resulting products of the project was less than what was expected. So that's one. The other one was the buildings and the structures being built were actually incompatible with the needs of the people at the time. So, for example, you had the heart center, the lung center, and the kidney center, all of which were built during Imelda's time. And at the time, they were cutting edge hospitals, right? Featuring the best in facilities to treat kidney disease and lung disease and heart disease. The number one killer of Filipinos during that time was cholera and dysentery. And those are diseases that are born out of a lack of running water. So you had these high-tech hospitals, but really people were dying of a simple lack of running water. So the Nawasa that you have now, the Manila water and the Maynilad, that was not present at the time. So people had to look for ways of, usually they dig their own wells, right? They dig their own wells into the ground and try to look for water, which is why you see a lot of old houses have water tanks, right? Because they were storing their own water. There was no government water service, which also meant that if you're storing your own water or if you're getting your own water, that water isn't clean, right? It's not treated. So unlike now, no, we should go through Manila water and stuff. That's already, it's been treated. It's supposed to be clean. Non wala. So there, right? The very simple disparity of you have beautiful projects, but your people were dying of the simplest, the lack of running water. And that was that was symptomatic of the regime, that they would give each other, they would create uh ano to? They would create projects just to make the country look good for foreign visitors, but weren't doing much to actually help the needs of the people. Wait, somebody was saying something. Ella was saying communist recruitment that Marcos claimed to want to curb actually became the opposite, but they grew. Yes, they grew huge. His regime became the number one recruiter of the NPA. True, and that was because of frustration. A lot of college students joined the NPA. There was a term for it, mamumundok, right? So pag sinabi ng isang tao na mamumundok siya, it means he's joining the movement. And so that's where the communist movement grew, the NPA movement grew. A lot of them were frustrated, angry college students who joined the movement, right? And they were fighting in the mountains, right? Um, and then Marty says, according to his national debt of the Philippines at the end of administration was 10 billion. It was 30. And the amount in the Marcos Bank account was 10 billion as well. No, so the debt, the national debt of the Philippines by the end of the Marcos regime was $30 billion, right? In 1983 money. You can do if you wanted to look for how much it is in current money, it's several hundred billion, right? That's the translation of it. If you translate that but to pesos, it's trillions of pesos, right? Yes, Sophie, I'll get to that in a second, actually. I'll get to that interview. But yeah, so if you translate even the $10 billion that they supposedly took, they have something like several trillion pesos in money. So easily they'd be the wealthiest family in the country, right? Easily. And so you're wondering, well, they have all these resources, and then it shouldn't be a surprise why they're so, they can use media so well. I'm sure they have the best consultants. They have the best people to help them with their messaging because they have the money for it, right? Some other things. So the other thing that I think people don't realize is that when we were growing up, and I think some of you might still see this as patterns with your relatives abroad when they send you, let's say, boxes of stuff. Who still gets those? Yung mga boxes from your relatives from the States. What's in them? Chocolate. What else? Bags. Yeah. Lotions. Yeah. Shoes. Canned goods. Right? Soap. Don't you guys want to tell them meron naman kami niyan dito eh. Ba't kayo nagpapadala? But the reason why they were sending that was because during the martial law period, Marcos banned importation. So these things, soap, canned goods, lotion, chocolates, we really just didn't have them. They were not in the country. The only place you could get them was via Clark Air Base because the Americans had them, right? The American servicemen inside Clark Air Base had imported Well, it's not important to them, right? But American food, American soap, American snacks. And what some enterprising American soldiers would do was they'd sell them outside of Clark in a place called Dau, right? And the Dau market was really just this huge tent market of vendors selling things like M&M's, Three Musketeers, Hershey bars, Ivory soap, right? And that was a huge market. People would sell it. Eventually, some of those will end up in Green Hills, DAU, Dau, right? The Dau market. And some of those will end up in Green Hills. You'd go to Vira Mall, which is now V Mall, right? And they'd sell it there. And they were ridiculously expensive, right? The M&Ms cost more then than they do now. If you want to wonder about how expensive they were, right? Those things were really expensive. And so if you had relatives from the States, that's what they'd send you. As a matter of fact, some of the other things they'd send you would be what? Grapes, apples, oranges, right? In the box. So that was something also that I experienced. That for me, all these things that we now see in the grocery just wasn't there. And so we look forward to it. The other thing maybe was the brief appearance of Voltes 5, right? In Voltes 5 and all these robots in media. It was very brief. I don't think it lasted a year or 2 years siguro. Before the Marcos regime canceled it because they realized that the story of Voltes 5 is the story of uh, Earth people fighting against an oppressive regime. And they're like, wait, why do we really want to have our kids watching a rebellion against an oppressive regime? So they canceled all of the shows, which resulted in national trauma. My batch was traumatized by it. We never saw the ending of Voltes 5. The only time we saw the ending of Voltes 5 was in 1997 when they decided to re-air the entire series again. And it was funny because I was already working in 1997. And I remember the day that they aired it because the day that they aired it was, I think, a Tuesday. And driving home, there was no traffic on the roads. That was how important the return of Voltes 5 was. That on a weekday, there was no traffic on the roads at all because everybody was somewhere watching Voltes 5. Right. And then when you watch the ending, you were like, oh my God, that was the ending. Ugh. Ang corny pala ng ending. But, right, what did it do? It fueled an entire industry. You guys have seen it, these collectibles, these toy collectibles, worth 5, 6 figures. Who buys them? My generation. Why? They're still trying to catch Voltes 5. A Voltes 5 toy is like 25,000 pesos. Like that's nuts. But we buy them. Why? Because it's a trauma, right? We were never closed. It was never closed to us. We never saw the ending of it. So there, no. So what else? So it was quiet. My experience of martial arts was a little different because my family apparently, I didn't know this at early on, but my family apparently was close to Ninoy Aquino. They never talked about him kasi. So I only found out that they were close when he died. Um, so after he died, after 1983, my awareness kind of changed because my mother started to work with Radio Veritas. And so every morning, I would hear Radio Veritas at home, actually the whole day, right? I'd hear Radio Veritas. And sometimes I would be picked up from school by my mom, and then she'd go to Radio Veritas, it's a radio station in Fairview, and I'd end up doing my homework, right, in the radio station. And I'd hear people disappearing. I'd hear about the salvagings and it was called salvage because you salvage the body, right? You recover the body. So I would hear the salvaging. So I would see the posters being shown of the people getting recovered, and the notifications of who have disappeared. Uh, and then ano yun? There's another term that came out of martial law. Pupulutin ka na lang sa kangkungan, right? Some of you may have heard that term. And that also came from martial law because that was where you'd find the bodies, right? Sa kangkungan. So you'd pick them up from kangkong fields. So uh so there, no? And so I was very aware of that. And then if you didn't know, uh when Ninoy died, there was a huge merchandise market that kind of popped up. Everybody was making those yellow t-shirts with Ninoy's face on it, and then hindi ka nag-iisa. And then there were little pins. They were yellow or black, right? And you could wear them, right? They were just black, squared. You can wear them. And they had hindi ka nag-iisa on them. And that you kind of had to wear hidden, because if people saw you on that, you could get questioned why you were wearing it. So but like for me, it was stickers and pins uh, and t-shirts, and we had contests in school about as to who had more pins. The Laban sign, right, was the sign of the party of Ninoy Aquino. Ironically, also now the party of Rodrigo Duterte. PDP Laban was Laban originally, Laban as in fight against Marcos. Ironically, now it's Duterte's party. Um, yes, this one, right, which you flashed. The Marcos sign was this victory, which becomes problematic now because there's also this, right? Then you guys are taking pictures. So that's problematic. And so there was a controversy a few years ago with Ateneo, the Ateneo Alumni Association, the Ateneo Scholarship Foundation invited Imelda Marcos to a dinner because she's one of the founding members of the foundation. If you didn't know, Imelda Marcos provided funds for the scholarship fund, and so she was there. And then the scholars took pictures with Imelda na nakaganon. And syempre nagwala yung mga Atenista. How dare you? How could you? Blah, 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 blah. And we kind of had to figure out, wait, they weren't flashing the Marcos sign. They were doing this one. And that looks like this. And, it triggered so many angry Atenistas. Father Jet had to issue an apology for it, right? Which was hard. And Father Jet was saying, because he's a scholar, and so he was there, and he had a picture with her, and he was like, he was so uncomfortable, and he said, "Do I fake a stomach ache to get out of this? But that would be lying, and I'm a priest. So what do I do?" So he had to stay, right? But yeah, that was horrible. It was a horrible thing. Anyway, so some people are saying things on chat. Wasn't it Marcos? Wasn't it that wasn't solely responsible for the deaths and missing people? I mean, Bongbong claimed to have no connections to their crimes, but they themselves were perpetrators. Amy likes to say that she was a little girl when martial law happened. She wasn't a little girl, right? She was already uh, full grown. As a matter of fact, she was a college student. Uh, and yes, there was the Archie, I forget his last name, who was killed during Amy was campaigning for a student leader post. He questioned her, Archimedes something, I forget his last name, but uh, he questioned her. He disappears. His body is found a couple of days after sa Kangkungan and is beaten. The body is beaten, and they say the police said that he was caught in a rumble, a fight between frats, and he was killed. Funnily enough, Aimee actually admits to ordering his death in a foreign court, right? In an American court, she says, yes, I had him killed, but that has no bearing to this case anyway, because that is on record in a foreign court, right? But because it had no relation to what the case was, Wala lang. It was never really, nothing was really done about it. Bongbong was by 1986. Bongbong was vice governor of Ilocos Norte, of Ilocos, right, of Ilocos province. So you know they were not children, they were not innocent, right? If you do a brief research into how these people were living when they were in college, you will find out that each of them had mansions bought for them just so that just so that they will live when they were in college. Bongbong had a mansion in England. Amy had a mansion in New York, right? So no, they were not innocent. There were noise barrages and honker signs of protest only later on. Earlier on, people weren't noise barraging. That was dangerous, right? Yeah, Arikim Destrahana. There you go. Yes. No one dared Paul to like open the case and she did no. Although I suspect there is a case already somewhere pending. That's the other thing about the Marcoses you have to know. There are cases pending. There are hundreds of cases pending. And that's why they cannot admit to anything, which is why Bongbong is insisting that everything's not true. An admission in public, and that Amy did not admit in public, she admitted in court. So, uh, yeah, an admission in public would be tantamount to a confession, which they can't do. Which is why they don't talk about martial law. They say history will judge because they can't talk about it. They will be found guilty, right? And there are still hundreds of cases. That's also probably why they want to come back to power, right? Try to make those court cases go away. So they're still there. They're still facing that, and nobody's going to. And that's why tuloy-tuloy yung that constant rhetoric, which brings us to uh, that interesting interview with him. Did you guys watch it? No, I didn't either. um, but the interesting thing there was Imelda was already proven guilty of a case 2018. Yes, they didn't jail her because it was unhumanitarian to jail an old woman. Actually, the term that was used by the police was baka magalit yung matanda. Right? And that means something when it's Imelda Marcos kasi, you know, she could still have you killed. She's still that powerful. So, you know, and then people don't want to cross her. So, yeah, so she is a convict, right? Imelda Marcos is a convicted criminal who's walking around free as a bird, but she's convicted because they're afraid of arresting her. They're afraid of the gulo that might happen if they arrest her. The Diliman Commune, yes. The Marcos military troops infiltrated the UP Diliman campus and suppressed academic freedom, and the response of the Diliman students was to barricade the campus. Right, that was what happened. They barricaded the campus. It was there for a while. Ateneo did the same thing. We barricaded the campus. Some students got expelled here for doing so. There were raids on campuses. It's not just UP. Ateneo was raided also. So there was an incident in the English department where I worked. The secretary, who was there at the time, si Ate Josie, she's retired now, but she was telling me that she was very young. She was the new secretary. Nag-raid ang police. And you had people like Rolando Tino, Nick Johnson, Pete Lacaba, Bienvenido Lumbera in the faculty. And the thing is, these guys are also with the NPA. So they had materials, they had poems, they had work, they had pamphlets, they had stuff in their offices. So they had to hide them underneath Ate Josie's desk. And Ate Josie was so scared because if they opened the desk, all of the paraphernalia was there, but they never did, thank goodness. So nobody was arrested at that time. One of our faculty members, uh, Max Pulan, was actually arrested and detained for a few months. Right? He doesn't talk about it. We've tried to ask him about it. He doesn't talk about it at all. But yeah, he was detained. Right? And Rylan is saying Imelda became governor of Metro Manila. Yes. she didn't start the conjugal dictatorship. It was always a conjugal dictatorship. Um, from the very beginning, I think that they knew what they were going to do um, from the get-go. Right? Both of them understood that they were going to be doing something ambitious and that they needed each other's help to do so. Marcos needed Imelda because Imelda was gorgeous. Wait, Ella's asking, wasn't the Gaidon named differently during the time? Pugadlawin. Yes, 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 yes. They did. They did. Although I think the Gaidon was the older name. Eh. It's the Gaidon and it became Pugadlawin, then it went back to the Gaidon. So I think the Gaidon was the older name talaga of the publication. We just went back to it. Um, but so yeah, no. So on the Marcoses, yeah, they knew what they were doing, and they still do, right? They still know what they're doing. So the family wanted to the couple, right? Marcos and Imelda, who knew what they were going to do. The thing was, I think, for Imelda, if you ask her in interviews of her, she will say that her job, her official job, was to buy beauty, right? To acquire as much beauty as she could so that the Philippines could be beautiful. If you were if you wanted to listen to her, she has a philosophy called the true, the good, and the beautiful, right? Which is her own. She invented it. So from what I've heard, is she carries a book, which is actually the Bible of the true, the good, and the beautiful, and that's her book. That's her philosophy, and she will actually evangelize from it if you give her the chance, right? Needless to say that maybe she's a little, but we don't really know. So there, no, and Imelda's. I don't know if you've heard this, but I'm sure you've heard of Imelda's spending, the shoes, no? What else have you heard? The fake documents? Well, yeah, the medals. She wore a fake tiara. Yes, because she wanted to be. Ano yun? That was Diana, if I remember right. She was at the wedding of Diana. She was forbidden from wearing a crown or a tiara because she wasn't royalty. And so she wore it upside down. She wore it na nakatago so that hindi halata, but she wore it anyway. Right. Here's something about Aimee, just to kind of debunk Aimee's claims of being clueless. There was one time, Aimee would actually send her breast milk home from the States to feed her babies by airplane, by PAL. So she would pump them in New York and then would actually air fly them to Manila where her babies were. Right. That's one. There was also the incident of the cheese. I remember this. They had the Marcos family was in Europe and they were flying home on a 747. And then Imelda, I think, goes, ay, nakalimutan natin yung cheese. And they fly back to buy cheese. Right? Ginawang ano, 'di ba? Ginawang grocery ang Greece, I think. They were in Greece. They wanted to buy feta cheese or something. But ay, yung cheese! Bumalik sila. Right? That was the level of spending that they were at, right? When Imelda would go shopping, she'd close the store. It's only her inside the store. Right? Yun yung level nila. Right? You don't see that now. You don't see anyone like, I want to I want to buy ganyan. So, right, and instead of putting money to help the poor, she used the government to build the folk arts theater. Yes. Construct the film center, yes. To beautify, according to the true the good, yes. That was called the edifice complex of the Marcoses. They built edifices, they built monuments to themselves. The folk arts theater was actually a bigger project, right? It wasn't just for the Miss Universe. Uh, pageant. It was actually a supposed to be a cultural center, CCP, right? The Cultural Center of the Philippines, where they would be presenting the arts and stuff. What was the problem? Nobody could afford the ticket. The only people who could afford the ticket to the cultural center at the time were the rich. So if you're talking about trying to elevate the culture of Filipino, you weren't. Why? Nobody could afford it at the time, huh? So how could you do that? So yung ganun. Uh, there was you've seen the Coconut Palace in Luneta. There is a building in that complex, the CCP complex called the Coconut Palace. It's a, as the term says, no, it's a mansion made out of coconut wood, coconut shells, coconut, the whole thing. It was supposed to be the residence of Pope John Paul when he visited the country. Pope John Paul refused because it was too extravagant. And so the Coconut Palace is still sitting there, basically doing nothing. Right? I don't even know if it's open to the public. It's just there. I don't know what state it's in. I don't know what's going on with it. It's just there. But they were making things like that, right? And the point was to make us look impressive to foreign countries. A lot of the Marcos work was done to impress other countries, to make us look better, right? The internal stuff they weren't doing very well at. So uh I don't know if you've heard people talk about the Nutribon, right? Nutribon, may Nutribon ng time ni Marcos. It was a monai that was enriched with vitamins. That was what a Nutribon was. And it wasn't a Marcos project. It was a US aid project that Marcos repackaged. So it wasn't actually a Marcos project, but everybody remembers it as a Marcos project because he had repackaged it to look like it was his. It was an American project alongside a brand of milk, which was actually rather famous in Southeast Asia. Palace in the Sky, yes, was also created for the Pope, which was not finished. It was never finished because the EDSA happened, and we ran out of money. Right, the government defaulted on its loans. We ran out of money, and so what happened next was that was never finished. It was supposed to be this beautiful building. Never saw it. Right. I don't know if you've seen this. Let me share it with you. This is also part of the Nutriban project. Uh, that thing, right? Klim, right? Which is of course just the opposite of milk. And that was actually also part of the whole uh, nutrition project, and it was designed to help uh, developing countries nourish their kids. Right? People are calling for a return to of the Nutribon project, which I don't think is a bad idea because our kids are underfed now. Right? If you go, you guys are not, obviously you're not underfed, but if you go around, and I guess you wouldn't have noticed it, but I've noticed that Filipinos are shorter now than they were when I was growing up. I'm tall now and I'm 5'7". I'm not tall at all. But if I walk in the mall, everybody's like here, right? Male or female. And it's like, bakit? I'm not tall. I'm not supposed to be looking over people's heads. So there is a degradation, right? In terms of nutrition that has happened. Anyway, right? So there. So what other things should I tell you about martial law? Well, the big stuff, right? Marcos stole a lot of money. It damaged our economy severely. It installed a bunch of people who, some of whom are still actually in positions of power up to today, right? Economically and politically. Not just them. No, they have allies who are in power up to today. And uh, it damaged the way we do politics. Suddenly, politics was not about a merit or what you can do. It became who you know. And up to today, that's the case. Now, I'm sure you've heard, even in your family, sometimes someone say, oh, may kilala ko. I know someone here, I know someone there. And that comes from that era. Were there a version of trolls that existed during that time? Not the way they are now. Because if you were a troll then, your only way of trolling was either publication or broadcast, which were controlled by the Marcoses. So underground, yeah, right? So you'd be passing underground publications. That was the only way. And rumor mongering was the other one. So it was funny that chismis actually served a practical purpose during martial law. That was how we get the real news. The problem is it's chismis, so we don't know how much of it is real and how much of it isn't. But that was the only way we'd find out. But it's kind of continued up to now, right? Chismis is still important to us, right? And that's kind of also why social media does what it does, right? It's a lot of it is chismis, right? The whole, I don't know if you've heard about it, right? The whole Marcos myth, diba? Their attempt to explain why they're rich. Have you heard that? Na kesyo may pera sila from the ancient family of this sultan, and that sultan had this much money, and the money was, I don't know how Jose Rizal is involved, but he is. And then the Marcos is apparently the lawyer. And so it is entrusted to him, and he's supposed to use the money to help the country, blah, 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 blah. Right? It's such a ridiculous thing. But so many people believe that. Right? What's the problem with that? Why do they believe it? I think it's because number one, it's exciting, right? It looks at a grand past, a past that seems to be more exciting than the actual past we have, right? This legendary family and all that stuff. The other one is there's that promise of greatness, right? That we were great and we could be great again. And the last one is it's just a good story, right? It make a good movie, diba? It's along the lines of the Da Vinci Code. If I wrote that as a novel, it would look like the Da Vinci Code. But it's that. It's a compelling fiction. And the thing is, that's the problem, right? We can't seem to tell the fiction from the reality. And I think I will end it there. We'll get back to regular programming next week, I promise. I just wanted to take the time to talk to you guys about this today. Okay, it's time now. It's about 5 minutes to 10. So I will give you guys one more chance for questions, and then I will see you off to your weekends. Is it true or somewhat true that Marcos was just a puppet? No, I think martial law was not something that the Americans wanted, right? But the Americans didn't do anything about it. Is more it, right? Your father was surgeon 9, so it's a revolution. He was directly behind the nuns. He saw the helicopter. Yeah. There were helicopters sent to EDSA, and they were supposed to shoot at the crowds. What they didn't know was the pilots that they had already sent were already defected. So when the pilots took off following orders, they took off and then landed in Aguinaldo. So the helicopters that were supposed to bomb the crowds took the weapons and landed in Aguinaldo. So suddenly there was air support for Enrile and Ramos. So that was one of those things, no. But that's another story, I think. The whole EDSA thing is another story. And how lucky we were. And so many decisions made by people then could have changed what EDSA was. So yeah. Why do you think ang dami pa rin pro Marcos to this day? Yung nga, ang daming naniniwala dun sa kwento, yung mga kwento-kwento. And the Marcoses themselves embrace it kasi. You will never hear Bongbong Marcos say that, no, that whole Vatican, whatever is a lie. You'll never hear him say that, but you'll also never hear him say it's true. Because it's not, right? He'll just let it sit there and then let the conspiracy theorists run off on their own, right? And then they believe it. So yeah. And I don't think there are as many as you think there are. I think social media amplifies their noise, but I don't think there are as many. If judging by the people who have actually gone in support of the Marcoses, konti lang. And I do think that the troll network is actually a Marcos network. It's not a Duterte network. So, uh, you take that into account that the trolls are actually Marcos things, and so how many of it is true? Very few, siguro. I suspect. Yeah. So anyway, about 4 minutes to the bell. I will see you guys off. I have a consultation with one of you in a bit, in a couple of hours. But in the meantime, have a good lunch. Have a great weekend. I will see you again this Friday. The next Friday. Okay. Bye bye, folks.
Thank you, sir.
You're
Thank you,
Bye,
sir.
sir.
welcome.
Thank you
Thank
for
you
this, sir.
po.
Thank you, sir.